So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this panel discussion on Omni-channel. Basically, this is a panel discussion arranged and organized by ISB. And basically, this is joins our interest and passion for retailing and Omni-channel. In ISB, we basically provide a platform for Omni-channel for both scholars and practitioners. So we want to hear basically more views and perspectives from practice as well as research. And this is where the goal of this panel discussion today. So we have great panelists with us today. We have Professor Murali Mantrala, who is basically a Professor Emeritus of Marketing at University of Missouri. And he's a ISB Research Fellow. So he has been with us in ISB now for more than a year as a visiting faculty. And we learned a lot from him. I personally learned a lot from Professor Murali. And we actually have a paper together, and we will be working on these kind of topics on omnichannel retailing and retailing in general. So there's a lot to say about Professor Murali. He won many awards. He has been like co-editor of Journal of Retailing, in the editorial board of many top journals in marketing. And he was also a manager of ZS Associate. We have also with us Mr. Dheeraj Arora. Mr. Dheeraj Arora is an MBA in sales and marketing, and he has experience of more than 23 years in sales and distribution in FMCG across account management, customer marketing, trade category management, sales strategy, sales force, B2B. And he's now Vice President, Modern Trade, E-commerce, Omnichannel, and Institutional Business at Unilever. Hi, Mr. Dheeraj.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
We have also with us Mr. Shishir Gupta. He's the head of Omnichannel at Arvind Fashions Limited and steers the digital charter of international brands such as US Polo, Gap, Sephora, and more other brands. He has worked for retailers such as Shoppers Stop, Metro Cash, and Kerry. He's an alum of IIM Indore and holds a business analytics certificate from University of Texas at Austin. Hi, Shishir. So today we have an audience that is very diverse. So we have students mostly in analytics, masters in analytics at ISB. We do have also a public audience, like managers and from different perspectives. I hope you will enjoy this discussion. I'm sure it's going to be a great discussion, and we'll learn a lot from these beautiful minds. So let me first start with Professor Murali with a question about trends in retailing in general in the world and in India, and what would be his take on retailing, omni-channel retailing in general. Professor Murali, please.
Thank you, Ahmed, for that very nice introduction, and thanks to all the participants for taking time on a Saturday morning to listen to this very fascinating topic. I'm going to use a few slides because I'm an academic and I guess have a habit of showing slides, but hopefully it will set the stage for the remaining discussion. In my initial remarks, I'm going to just focus on very broad facts and trends, both globally and in India with respect to omni-channel. And also take a few minutes just to define omni-channel for the benefit of those who are not too familiar with the concept, because it's still an evolving term. And then I'll pass it on to Dheeraj and come back later and talk about maybe some post-COVID issues. Giri, can we go to the next slide, please? So, this is just a factual slide that what is the context? Well, worldwide retail business or revenues is a huge number. It's a major industry across the world, and it's crossed about $26 trillion worldwide already, and it's projected to reach about $30 trillion in a couple of years. So retailing is a huge business. It's an important sector for most countries and important component of the GDP. So what we are talking about today is, I think, economically important, but I think all of us have seen how critical this industry becomes in a situation that we had in the last few months. Giri, can we go to the next slide? But of course, the part of this which has occupied most of the media attention and people's students and others is the e-commerce part, which is today it's actually close to maybe 16 or 17% of total retail worldwide sales, and it will reach over $6 trillion in a few years. That's projected by eMarketer. But I just want you to, again, everyone to realize that whichever way you look at it, it's e-commerce, despite all the attention, is still less than 20% of total retail trade. And so the question arises, where is the rest of the business? Well, of course, the rest of the business is in our traditional brick and mortar stores. So keep that perspective in mind, because the whole of the omni-channel game is really about how to manage both sides together in a way that optimizes performance. Giri, can we go to the next slide? So in India, interestingly, it is not so much the distinction between brick and mortar and e-commerce retail that is important, but it's actually still the distinction between traditional retail and modern retail. And I'm sure we'll hear more about the latter from our esteemed colleague from Unilever. But fundamentally, traditional retail are all the so-called kirana stores and small traders and mom and pop stores. And out of the approximately $1 trillion of retail sales in India today, they still over about 90% of total India retail is traditional. And so the remaining 10% is where much of our recent science and technology seem to apply, which is the e-commerce and the modern retail. Modern retail is about 9%, and e-commerce is still barely 3 to 4% of total retail. It's projected to go to 7% or so, and these are data from Retailers Association of India in collaboration with Deloitte. But again, just to put this in context, while India is a huge retail market in the sense it'll cross $1 trillion, e-commerce is still got a long way to go. And there is a huge amount of business being transacted in the traditional retail. Giri, can we go to the next slide? So what is omni-channel? And this term is much bandied about, and I think my experience is a lot of people confuse omni-channel with online retailing. They're not exactly the same thing. In fact, you could have omni-channel retailing without any online retailing, as long as you have multiple channels. So I think one way to think about this is to look back on how retailing evolved. And before the 21st century, by and large, it was traditional retail worldwide, and which really meant brick and mortar stores. And then around 20 years ago, the internet revolution took hold. Around mid-90s, Amazon came on the scene, and e-commerce took off by the beginning of this century. And so we had effectively a new retail channel, which is the electronic channel, being added to the traditional brick and mortars channel. But still, the perspective was that consumers tended to either go to one or the other. And so some retailers were debating about 15 years ago, should they become multi-channel, which means that should they keep both channels, because they felt there were segments in their consumer population who preferred one or the other. But it's only been over the last 5 to 10 years that the realization has dawned that consumers don't like to be boxed in or channeled in. Consumers would like to shop and get whatever they want anywhere, anytime. And there is no reason why they would stick to one or the other channel. And in fact, the so-called path to purchase, which we'll talk about in a minute, could take them through offline for some stages and online for other stages. And so the realization dawned on retailers worldwide that actually we are now entering the brave new world of omni-channel retailing, where consumers might use different channels for different stages of their shopping journey. In which case, how does a retailer devise their strategies? And should they, if they were pure play, should they remain like that? Or if they were already hybrid, how do they effectively take advantage and exploit this omni-channel behavior? Giri, can we go to the next slide? And the big enabler in all this was the advent of the smartphone. So the smartphone and mobile app revolution essentially put what I like to call a magic wand in the hands of consumers, and they could, with this, navigate in both channels freely, as and when they pleased. Previously, they couldn't. I mean, you either were shopping in a brick and mortar store or a mall, and it's not that easy to find out what's going online till you go back home and look at your desktop. But with a mobile phone, smartphone, you can actually keep cross-checking, and not just within the retailer, but also with your friends and colleagues, social media. So this is really the grease or what has facilitated this omni-channel behavior on the part of consumers, which is now disrupting many traditional retailers' lives. Can we go to the next slide, please? So essentially, the new concept of omni-channel retailer, and now I'm speaking like the editor of the Journal of Retailing at that time, when the term was first published in the Journal of Retailing. We had much debate about what it should be, and ultimately we decided that the definition is that omni-channel refers to the synergetic management of different channels along with the customer touch points, with the goal of optimizing the customer experience across all stages of their journey without worrying about whether it's one channel or the other, but essentially making the customer feel good at the end. Giri, can we go to the next slide? But why bother with these folks? Well, the data is actually quite amazing, which is that omni-channel consumers, those who sort of flip-flop or crisscross different channels, may be a small proportion of the total population of shoppers, 7% in this e-marketer slide, but they actually contribute 27% of total retail. So basically, everybody's interested in them because they are very valuable consumers. Giri, can we go to the next slide? And this is a busy looking framework, but it's actually a pretty comprehensive framework that Professor Ahmed and Professor Gangwar, who runs this program for ISP, and I have been working on, which tries to put the consumer journey, which is above the horizontal dotted line, viewed as multiple stages: pre-purchase stage, purchase stage, and post-purchase, and some sub-stages. You want to put that in, juxtapose that against what a retailer has to offer. And if you are a hybrid retailer, presumably you have both offline and online channels. And then the issue is which stage of the shopping journey does a consumer turn to which channel? And sometimes they might research online and buy offline. Sometimes they may do the reverse. They might research or search in a showroom and buy online. Sometimes they may buy online, but they want to pick up the goods offline. Sometimes they do everything online, but they want to return the goods offline. So there are various possibilities. I mean, there are a huge number of shopping paths. And today's game for people entering this field is, what is the optimal path which I, as a retailer, should choose and develop for my consumers, given my expertise and my talents and my competitive advantage. So this is basically the stage, and I'm going to stop here and let the practitioners tell us more about this, and then say a few words at the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Murali, for these wonderful insights, actually. And let me now ask Mr. Dheeraj, basically, how do you see the changes in customers' behavior that Professor Murali talked about, and maybe more other changes in the Indian customer specifically? And how do you see the future of omni-channel retailing in India? Mr. Dheeraj, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, can I? Yeah, am I audible now?
Yes,
Right.
perfect.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. And so Professor Murali set up a good context, and he spoke about the contributions of modern trade and e-commerce in India. Let me, share, and I represent FMCG from that lens. The contributions are even lower when it comes to FMCG, both globally and in India for e-commerce and organized trade, especially organized trade in India. So that's one part of it. However, if you look back to the definition that Professor Murali spoke about of Omni, it's about seamless channels across. There are seamless channels which exist in India and are very, very specific to India. All of us, at least once in a month, call the neighborhood kirana. It's a telecalling. To my mind, it is in some way an Omni experience, and that's something which is extremely big in India. But that said, we cannot trace back the journey as Professor Murali spoke about, and the last chart that Professor Murali shared in the e-commerce parlance, it's called ROPO or ROPA, which is research online, purchase offline or anywhere. Bimbo, browse in store on mobile, buy online, and Boris, buy online, return in store. Yeah, Professor Murali, those are the acronyms used in general parlance. But coming back to your question, Ahmed, with respect to how things have changed for consumers and shoppers. First of all, the entire concept of reaching out to the shopper. So, if we look at our ecosystem, there are three parts to the entire ecosystem for any goods manufacturer. It's demand generation, demand capture, and demand fulfillment. Yeah. And with e-commerce and Omni, all three have been, I would not say disrupted, but have been influenced or impacted. See, the entire demand generation piece, and some of the people who would be here wouldn't have seen, especially the millennials, they would not be so conversant with it. But people from our age, earlier it was all about what content the broadcasters could serve to the consumers, versus now consumers have complete right on what they want to see when it comes to demand generation. Yeah, all of us are attuned to OTT. We pick and choose what content we want to see, whether we want to see advertisement, which is the biggest source of demand generation, or not. Yeah, and hence that has completely changed with e-commerce, omni-channel, and the digital coming in. That's one. Second, if you look at from the shopper lens, and if I go back 15 years in time, the biggest piece about shopper marketing used to be what was called as FMOT, the first moment of truth on the shelf. That has been shifted to what is now called ZMOT. Yeah, where a shopper and like Professor said, the shopper, has awareness or has information about the product thanks to the smartphone, thanks to online, even before he or she reaches that point of buying it on the shelf. Yeah, that's the second thing which has significantly changed. And third, is with respect to the entire battle. Earlier used to be fought in that shelf. Now it is fought on that 3x3, 4x4 screen, where the manufacturers have to win. And what has happened in the process? The word of mouth has been replaced by stars. Yeah, all of us are aware of what stars are. so those ratings and reviews have become more important than what a decade back was word of mouth. Influencers have become more important than celebrities, and uh, uh, the content has become more important than the recommendation by the retailer himself. People now want to see very rich content to really meet whether it is meeting the requirement or not. So that's how the entire consumer journeys, etc., have changed, and the whether it is customers, retailers, or manufacturers, they have no choice but to align to all of this to continue to stay ahead of the curve.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dheeraj. It's really nice to see the perspective of both academicians and practitioners. Yeah, it's amazing, actually. So let me now ask Mr. Shishir specifically about omni-channel, but also linking it to this pandemic and COVID. So, Mr. Shishir, do you think omni-channel retailers have a competitive advantage when it comes to facing disruption such as COVID?
Thanks, Professor Ahmed, and thanks, Professor Murali, for setting up this context. I think it eases our answering these questions for both us, me. I mean, I and Dheeraj. Now, Professor Ahmed, coming back to the question that you asked, absolutely, I think because the revenue stream is just not limited to having a physical store or a distribution network which has a partner who has a physical store. Right now what can happen is that, with Omni, I think two bits are really important. One is having one view of inventory, at least from a retailer point of view. One is having one view of inventory, and other is having one view for the customer. So when I have a one view of inventory, I can connect any demand channel to that inventory. That means I can connect my own website, I can connect to various marketplaces, like I'm connecting to Myntra, Flipkart, Amazon, and converting my stores into a fulfillment center. That means my revenue stream has flipped completely, where my digital contribution, if it was, for any retailer, the digital contribution was 5%, 3%. It has flipped completely to, let's say, 30%, 40%, and 50%. It depends on which stage the retailer is into his on his omni-channel journey. And since they have converted their stores into a fulfillment center, and they're shipping it out to the customers nearby, what omnichannel retailers are also doing is that they're leveraging their cost structure as well. That means, what will their staff do right now when the customers are not visiting? They can now go and deliver as a hyper local delivery partners to, let's say, a 5-kilometer radius. So that's how they are leveraging their cost structure as well. And this has significantly changed, the way retailers are going to grow. Now, then the other bit is that there are many journeys, many traditional journeys which are now being digitized, and probably they were digitized, and now these journeys will experience a time travel, something like a shopper store. That means I can go to my phone and app, and I see my favorite store. What is that? What all options do they have? How, what is the inventory? Can I buy that? Will they deliver it to me? They can, basically, retailers can deliver, or the customers can go and pick it up from there. The other bit is, this entire ecosystem has also helped to ensure that customers are pretty much connected to the brand or the retailer. For example, they are booking appointments for visits. They are able to have a conversational commerce. That means they're chatting over the platform, or they're doing video chats to show the customer what is available. So all this has enabled the connect to the customer, which always remained, and it has enabled that the revenue stream probably has flipped, but the network is pretty much strong to ensure that they are delivering. And Dheeraj mentioned about two bit, which is demand generation and demand fulfillment, which is why at least this one view of inventory is helping in both demand generation and demand fulfillment, as I can connect as many channels as I want, as a retailer can connect as many channels as they want, and at the same time they are leveraging the common pool of inventory into the ecosystem. The other bit, as I said, is a single view of the customer. That means the demarcation is no longer there, and then I cannot emphasize more than what Professor Murali has emphasized, that there's no demarcation at all, which is a customer is an offline customer or is an online customer. That the demarcation is no longer there. And what is happening is at least data or analytics engines are helping us to onboard these customers very smoothly onto the digital journeys, and that through with personalization. So I think this is how I see the retailers, who are kind of little matured in this journey, have a fair competitive advantage. And if I have to put a number to it, then the post COVID recoveries of a retailer who was fairly mature, let's say 2 to 3 years matured in an omni-channel journey, is recovering with 2 times the rate than a normal retailer would recover. So I think that's how I can put the number. And the other bit is, when the retailer bring these customers as an omni customer, or a customer who's shopping from that retailer both online and offline, which probably for a non-mature retailer would be around 4 to 5%. It is bound to go to 40%, 45% at least in 2 quarters, and they deliver more than 4x of CLTV. So these are actually the customers who can, which a brand or a retailer cannot afford to lose. Which is why, having an omni-channel, at least in this scenario, which is, I think it's really important for any retailer to have to sustain the growth and basically sustain this environment itself.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shishir. And since we are talking about this COVID, so let me invite Professor Murali actually to tell us more, or his thoughts basically about the post-COVID customers. And are there any changes? Do you expect any changes to customers' behavior in the post-COVID world?
Can you hear me? Okay, so I want to be a bit circumspect in talking about post-COVID, because I don't believe we are post-COVID yet. And so this term is used as though there were 3 months of COVID and now everything is post. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So things are still, as I say, evolving, and different markets and countries are at different sides of the hill, which has to be crossed. But I can, I think, make a distinction between short-term effects and long-term effects. In this, if we define post-COVID as from the time COVID appeared on the scene, as opposed to the time when it ended, which it hasn't, then I think there are some interesting things that have occupied a lot of attention, blogs, reports over the last 3 months. And for sure, some are very logical and some are very speculative. But the first one is that clearly with social distancing and people being locked up at home, they couldn't go out, whether it was India or whether it was somewhere else, or they couldn't go out freely. So clearly you've got to get your supplies and groceries. And so online grocery shopping shooting up in those last 3 months is not a surprise. It went up like 37% in the US in April. And then, of course, people would like those to be delivered as close to their point of consumption. But then there was concern about the people delivering and whether that it was safe to interact with them. And so there was much more of buy online and pick up in store or outside the store on curbside in the US. Now, I, interestingly, as Ahmed said, have been locked down in India for the last 3 months. And so for us, it was more a question of ensuring the delivery person could somehow get as close to our apartment door as possible, because we weren't allowed to really go out. So in the US, it was a little more freedom, and people could go to curbside. And this, no doubt, will continue. Now, people are going less frequently to the stores to avoid interactions with others, and but still there are some items, especially groceries and so forth, which are needed at home, and it's difficult for delivery people, especially if they are blocked from coming in or they are not there to deliver. To do that. So bigger basket sizes, less frequent store visits, bigger basket sizes, more stockpiling of essentials has been occurring. And clearly, as we've seen in our own home, people are doing much more of home cooking and home consumption. They're not going out to restaurants and so on. So the essentials are running out fairly quickly. So those big baskets are needed. And this is where I think the Kirana stores, as someone mentioned earlier, they really have come into their own, because every time you think you should write them off and modern retail will replace them, I think they prove that they are essential elements of the ecosystem, because people couldn't go more than 3 kilometers, but they could go to their local Kirana stores and get a few of the things they needed, provided they practice social distancing. That leads to what I think is a universal concern, which is now might be an abiding concern, which is contactless shopping, where people really want to minimize their interactions with other shoppers, with other employees, and get what they want with minimal interactions. And that also goes hand in hand, literally, with more cashless purchasing. So So two things I think are going to be abiding. One is the contactless view of shopping and being very concerned about hygiene in the stores. And the second is whether it's online, whether it's delivery at home or in the stores. I think cashless purchasing is already rising in the business. Can we go to the next slide, please? So in the long term, clearly some of these tendencies that have already been commented on will continue. But in the long run, I think you will see much more when things become closer to normal. People will want more creative last mile delivery options for their grocery shopping, which I think the tendency to do more of it online will continue. But where do you pick it up? Does it come home? Do you pick it up in the store? Do they, and there have been some, grocery will always remain a sensitive issue in terms of freshness and so forth. In general, 20 million people in the US lost their jobs. And I think looking at the migrants in India, many such millions lost their jobs. Price sensitivity has to be now a part of the landscape. And people will want much more value for their money. So pricing has to be done very smartly. I think people would like to try things more at home before they buy. And if they have lack of fit, they would like more flexible returns policies. I think people don't want to spend too much time in stores, but for certain items, they have to go to stores and kind of examine things. So there'll be more showrooming behavior. And I'm only referring to things I feel fall in the omni-channel space. And so they may quickly go to a store, look at what's out there, the so-called endless aisle, and then come back and order online. And the contactless and digital payments should continue. But interestingly, a lot of the younger generation and many of us have realized how much the environment benefits when there aren't too many people using the streets and using cars and so forth. So I think there is this deep concern that the nature took a swipe at humanity to teach us a lesson, and we should be green and local and use sustainable brands which are trusted much more. And of course, even high quality private label products are likely to rise. So to me, these are some of the things in the long term which are going to change. And one last point on strategies. Giri, can we go to the last slide? So what does it mean for retailers? Well, obviously, a lot of disruption, but I do want to emphasize that a lot of these tendencies or trends were already going on even before COVID. And if anything, COVID has only accelerated all these trends, especially the closures of brick and mortar stores who are not doing a good job on customer convenience and experience. More reliance on smaller stores, showrooms, pop-up stores by retailers, and then doing much of the heavy lifting on online. Much more focus on technologies which can integrate channels, and that is not just technologies, but also data. Data from all sides is going to be more abundant, and more powerful analytics can exploit that. But all of that has to analytics. We keep talking as though they will solve the problem, but the fact is, you need data, and if data is totally different from what it was a few months ago, you can't look for patterns until a pattern actually sets in. But eventually, analytics is going to be important. And finally, orchestrating these ecosystems mentioned by my colleagues in supply chain, communication, transaction, and fulfillment. It's going to be mandatory for most retailers to be able to holistically think of this. Now, these are my thoughts, but I'm really interested in knowing how my colleagues here are viewing the challenge.
Yes, thank you, Professor Murali. I think definitely, like, the COVID is disrupting the whole world, and maybe we've heard enough actually of COVID, and in the news and in panel discussions there have been plenty. And so let's now focus more on the primary, the most interesting topic for the primary audience of this panel, which is analytics. So let me ask Mr. Dheeraj about the kind of analytics or customer analytics you use in your company. Of course, you can give us general ideas. We are not looking for any trade secrets here. Please.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. See, analytics, that is a very large field, I would say, and I think the biggest part is to get insights out of the various data sources we have. As especially in HL, data is like a lot of people have said, data is the new oil. This is the other data that I'm talking about. There is enough and more data sources, whether internal, external. Yeah, there are various external sources of data. Could be through the government bodies, through various data information sources through the government body. This thing. Then comes the data sources of across shoppers and consumers, and then a large source of research information which comes out. And I think the biggest challenge for any marketer is to cross-tab between these 4 data sources and understand trends and insights. And we have the benefit of being able to use all 4, but also, since we are a global organization, we also get the advantage of picking up some of the data sources from beyond one country to see how some of the countries are moving, and if there is a country which lags versus that country, how can that be a trend that can be picked up. So and we have global teams who work on this. There are dedicated teams who only specialize in this. We have the CMI team which works on it, but one of the recent additions have been in the space of online data centers. So we also are now picking up cues and trends through searches, through online databases, and what we call it as people data center. So it's across the board, and I think the challenge is not about what data we get. The challenge is not about analytics. I think the challenge, or what the biggest this thing is about getting the right insights from so many data sources and coming up with an actionable opportunity or an actionable plan to really get the business going.
Very good. Actually, so companies do have data, as you said. You have a lot of sources of data, and that's what we also want as scholars and researchers. And building these kind of platforms where companies could potentially collaborate with scholars in order to analyze data and come up with insights that could be beneficial for the companies, but also beneficial in terms of marketing theory and marketing research advancement. And that's basically what we do in ISB. We aim to do a data-driven type of research that could be beneficial for a lot of stakeholders. Thank you so much, Mr. Dheeraj. And let me now ask Mr. Shishir about a question that I think lot of, or all our students who are now watching this panel would want an answer to, is basically what kind of skills in terms of soft skills and technical skills you're looking for while hiring new managers in your organization.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Professor Ahmed, for this question. So I personally believe that the data pool will change a lot, with the retailers at least. What's going to happen is that if I were to hire, I would want people who can make sense out of data and leverage it for good. That's the one bit. Then the other bit is that people who can think through all these customer journeys. I mean, there are tons and millions of journeys that are there and not digitized yet. People who can think through all these journeys and help in digitizing these journeys. And the third bit is helping us to prioritize our digitization roadmap. So which use cases are really important, which use cases make more sense right now, quantifying them, and then putting them into the digitization roadmap. So in a sense, it's an amalgamation of people who are super analytical, people who are problem solvers, and people who are self-driven. I mean, one very important bit is that this entire bit is all about change management as well. So people should have. I'll be looking for people who have, very high stakeholder management skills, because this talent pool will be managing very large cross-functional projects to drive all these changes. So I think that's these are the most important bits. Probably anybody, including me, who will look from the future talent pool. One important bit also, what will start happening is that the sector, the retailers will become sector agnostic when it comes to hiring, because there's no longer the requirement of a person having an experience into retail or consumer goods, to be there to be hired. What's going to happen is that anybody who's able to bring in the right set of skills, the right set of mindset to help the retailers in this omni-channel journey would be very much welcome, and he'll be taken into the ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shishir, and I can tell you that you can count on our training in ISB to basically provide those skills. And we will be definitely, glad if you definitely consider our students to be part of your organization. So, now we're gonna open the floor for some Q&As, and some are already popping up. So let me ask this to Mr. Shishir. So Akshat asked, how to identify and benefit from the omni-channel customers when they cross brands and stores in their journey in a single purchase? We cannot hear you. We cannot hear you, Shishir. Mr. Shishir.
Yeah, but now I'm unmuted. So identification has many techniques, and I think this all starts from identifying the right journeys. So what are the journeys that will help you to help a retailer to say that this customer is an omni-channel customer? This could be various touch points of various transactions that has happened in the past across the channels, which is the customer is about online, offline. So a purchase history is definitely one way to identify. The other way to identify is our entire CRM database as well. So the customers who are a loyal customer of a retailer, they can start churning. Customers, retailers can look at this database and say, and again identify. The most toughest bit of the identification is how do we identify people or the customers into the physical arena. Now the customers who are visiting the stores, how do we identify that these are the omni-channel customers? And I see that the question is about across brands, cross brands. So it's a very difficult area to and it's a very difficult area because the identification can happen, but there's a lot of hardware requirement which has to be implemented into the physical stores, malls, etc. And B, the consent of the customer has to be there when you have to identify them. So unless the customer has consented that and then that's a pure play privacy law, that the customer has consented, you cannot identify them and try to do anything around them. Now in terms of benefits are multifold, and sky's the limit. You can retarget them. You can retarget them with personalization. You can do churn management, and the other bit is what we can also do is a prediction that what is that the customer is going to buy next, and or going to do next. So I think the benefits are multifold, but I mean, what I understood the question of Akshat is that he's trying to, it's mostly around the offline journeys and not the online journeys. The online journeys will also require a lot of collaboration. So let's say a customer is shopping from Amazon and he shopped US Polo and Gap. I would need that information from the marketplace, and that can only come with collaboration through data exchange, data exchange programs with such online players, and that's when some understanding or an action plan can be built in.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shishir. So Professor Murali, so Piyush is asking, what challenges and or opportunities does omnichannel present for customer retention?
Yeah, I think that clearly retention is a far more important strategy for many retailers than acquisition, because they really need to keep and satisfy customers. I think there is only one way to meet this challenge, and that is to provide the customers the kind of satisfaction in their needs that they want. And the way to do that, I mean, if you think about what do fundamentally omnichannel customers want, well, some want convenience, because those are the online folks who want things to be done with minimal use of their time and delivered at home. Well, a lot of people don't want to be confined at home. They want to go out and socialize and meet people at the mall and go to stores. So they want an experience. So if you boil everything down, there are two things on which retailers can try to gain an advantage and retain customers. They have to be really good at either providing convenience, or they have to be really good at providing experience, but they have to be good at one of these things. So the answer is really choose your position. Are you an offline retailer who's going to attract people because of the experience they have? Or are you trying to become an efficient retailer, lower costs, lower prices, and provide convenience? And you can actually find different retailers stressing one or the other. But interestingly, my colleague at Wharton, Barbara Khan, has now made it a point that you really got to be good at both, in the sense that you got to be really good at one of them and pretty good at the other. And so, again, this is a very general answer to your question, but I'm afraid there is no other solution. If you want to retain customers, you got to be really good at providing them what they want, your targeted customer, on the dimension that you have positioned yourself, and be really the best at it. And otherwise, someone else will undercut you. So that is the secret to retention. Satisfy your customers consistently and continuously.
Thank you so much, Professor. So there are many questions about analytics. So let me ask this to Mr. Dheeraj. So Kapil is asking how analytics can help doing concept testing for new products in the absence of surveys these days.
Honestly, during absence of surveys, etc., data analytics, there are other sources of data analytics, and with now online trends emerging, that's become another source of information. That's one. Second, so for example, a couple of years back, we had rolled out a complete range of male grooming, and that was based on the search trends that we saw, and also some of the velocity of male grooming products on some of the platforms. So we had partnered very closely with Amazon in India on this, and this was a range which was launched under the brand name of Brill Cream, and was initially, since we had partnered from day one from Amazon, was exclusively launched on Amazon, and then we extended to other e-tailers and then retailers. So in the absence of physical some of the sources of consumer searches, consumer trends can be very easily picked up from online sources and from retailers and e-tailers, and from there you can start your work backwards. So very much possible, to answer your question.
Thank you so much. So Mr. Shishir, Inakshi, I think, is asking a question about data in India, basically the India data. Let me find the question. So it's basically about what are the gaps in the Indian data and the availability of the Indian data. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, probably this is a very good question for Dheeraj because it's for FMCG, but I can take a stab at it. I think the biggest challenge remains the electronic POS, which is not so widely implemented across India. I mean, specifically, I'm talking about FMCG. It's probably limited to the share of the e-commerce and the organized modern trade players, where the data is available to the best level possible. Everywhere else, there's a market estimation technique, and usually it gets flawed when the on-ground execution is not proper. So I think that's the biggest gap, wherein the data capturing itself with the POS is not happening so very well. And this is absolutely my observation, my personal opinion. I mean, there are big organizations who are doing market estimation, but I mean, honestly, this is what I believe is the biggest data gap. And I think if Dheeraj can add anything that he feels like here.
Yeah. So Dheeraj, if you want to comment on that, and also let me ask you this question by Prashant. The question is, would it be feasible to extend omni-channel beyond retail in its current form to other industries? For example, someone interested in buying financial instruments and all.
Okay, so to the first question, Shishir rightly said, see, and Professor Murali started with it, 90% of the business in India, and especially in grocery and all, is still with traditional trade. And there is no point of sale, and there is no direct consumer shopper data which is available. And hence it is all, depending upon estimation techniques through research agencies who pick up this point of sale data manually and over periods of time. So I think that's the biggest difference between us and some of the developed countries, let's say US, UK, where a good 80 to 90%, or even Australia and all, where 80-90% of the business comes through online or e-commerce. Yeah. So that's, I think, the biggest difference. That's one. Second, at the end of the day, the shopper always, and there are very few very loyal shoppers to a particular channel. You have shoppers always traversing across channels, and if you don't have data for 85% of the business sitting, it's very difficult to map journeys and come to sharper trends versus where almost 85-90% of the business is already digitized and documented. Yeah, so that's the big difference between us and some of the developed countries. The second question with respect to Omni beyond the goods industries and services, it's already live and present. For example, if financial instruments, you very much have both sides now of online information available, as well as your the physical or the contacted programs which are run by, whether it is insurance, whether it is finance, whether it is hotels, whether it is travel industry. So Omni, I think, is already there across industries. I forget the name, but there's a big organization from China, and their starting point was insurance, and then they moved from insurance to hospital and so on and so forth, and is a very big conglomerate in China, and is a very good example if somebody wants to read up on it, on how the entire journey, they moved it online and then progressed from there. So very possible, already existing within India and beyond.
Yeah, thank you so much. So let me ask this to Professor Murali. So the question, Debjit's question is basically saying, considering India has a diverse population with different socio-economic demographic backgrounds, do we need to break down the omni-channel exposure across these different strata, different classes and segments of customers?
If I understood you correctly, should you tailor your omni-channel strategy to different segments?
Yes.
And this is just off the cuff, but in my mind, the e-commerce side of this, the users of e-commerce or people who go and shop online, they might have a certain, whether they are in one region or the other, they're like one segment, which has certain technologies, income levels, education levels, and so forth, which suggests maybe a uniform e-commerce strategy can be developed across much of the country. But I don't think that can apply to the offline side, because if ever there was a country where there's diversity in consumption habits and needs and tastes, it is India. And to me, the problem is, how do you cater to the local markets in different offline markets, especially in food and grocery and so on. So to me, there you need much more creativity. For example, D-Mart is so successful in Maharashtra. It's not clear that they'll be equally successful in some other part of the country, and they haven't even gone very far. So there are these cultural as well as taste differences, I think, which make the offline part of the omni-channel much more localized. And while the online part probably can be more uniform. And in that sense, those segments who use online are spread all over the country. But I think retailers have this kind of hybrid challenge in India, especially. You cannot have a uniform omni-channel strategy because of the offline differences.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Murali. So I think this is the end of our panel today, but of course the discussion will continue between practice and research, and of course students will be able to learn from both. And so let me thank the panelists we had today. We had a great discussion. We've learned a lot. I personally learned a lot from all of you. And hopefully we'll be able to discuss more on like other platforms. And this is an open invitation for all of you to visit ISP, to interact with the faculty in ISP. We definitely do have interest in the topics that you are working on, and we might be able to provide insights to practice as well. So this is an open invitation, and maybe this could be a beginning of a discussion between
and we will look at some of the unaddressed questions also.
Absolutely, definitely. There were many questions. We cannot, of course, answer them all. We thank the audience for being here today. Thank you all. This is a Saturday morning, I understand. But I hope you also learned a lot from these beautiful minds today. Thank you all, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Pleasure.
Pleasure. Bye.
Thanks.